Chapter 4 News. Ms. Euler is right pleased. Not only has she got her knife and kettle back, but the two shiny silver coins Pop is placing in her palm are fair payment for her purloined pullets. "You take half, Will," she tells Pop. "I cannot," he says, his voice soft and gracious. "What Cal and I did was not for money." Ms. Euler puts the coins into a front pocket in her apron as she turns quickly away. "Thank you, and bless you," she says, her voice choking a little on those words. Then she turns back to us, a smile again on her face. "Well," she says, "there's no way I was going to allow you to refuse a sit-down dinner and a night's lodging." "$1 means a lot to a widow woman," Pop says to me as we walk down Ms. Euler's lane. It's the following morning. We've not just had a huge dinner last night, but a breakfast this morning big enough to satisfy the appetite of a grizzly bear. I look back over my shoulder. Ms. Euler is still standing on her porch. I reach my hand into my right pocket and feel the quarter she slid into my palm as I was helping clear the breakfast dishes. "You must take this," she said fiercely. So I'd accepted it, knowing it would be bad grace to refuse. I have no doubt she wished us to stay longer. She must be lonely. Her cooking was surely good, and that barn was warm and comfortable. But we are men of the road, Pop and me. Clutching her apron in her left hand, she is still waving goodbye with her right, her arm held high like a brakeman with a lantern. Maybe she will stay there waving like that long after we've gone. But I do not turn back again. Rather than heading for the place just past the rail yard to hop the Southern, we swing by Jack's mess of a camp. As I expected, since few men ever choose to go up against Pop when he's laid down the law, Jack is gone. So too is the piece of canvas that served as a shelter. But his campsite's not empty. There's not one, but 2 whiskey bottles, plus something else left right in the open for us to see. Rather than use a pit latrine, Jack has left it there. Pop shakes his head, but there's a little smile on his face as he does it. He knows such a gesture of defiance is the mark of a coward, one who hightailed it as soon as he did it, probably catching the very train Pop told him to take yesterday. We go down to tidy things up before we leave. This is what the ethical code teaches a knight of the road to do. Always respect nature and do not leave garbage where you are jungling. Pop takes out the fold-up trenching shovel he always carries. He'd no more be without that than I would be without a book or 2 in my pack. Bullfinch's Mythology and Call of the Wild being my current companions, along with my dictionary. We bury Jack's mess, then roll the stones away from the fire pit and shovel enough dirt onto the still warm coals to make sure no stray sparks get into the surrounding dry brush. Few things makes folks resent us bows more than when a careless left fire pit sets the surrounding woods and fields ablaze. When we are done, there's no sign anyone was ever there. "Time to ride, son," Pop says. There's already half a dozen men crouched down in the weeds and brush a half-mile past the switching yard. We approach through a gully, bent low so that we do not attract the attention of the railroad bull, whose job it is to police the yard, walking back and forth by the train. He's checking all the boxcars hooked on behind the passenger cars, looking into them, atop them, under them, a heavy club in his right hand. I suspect he must know there's a passel of us knights of the road waiting outside his yard, but he is either lazy enough or cautious enough to not stray far from the open tracks. "All aboard!" is carried to us in the morning wind. We're ready. I can feel the tension in the men around us. They're all on this side of the tracks because of the hillside rising on the other side. The grade here keeps the rate of the train at just the right speed for a man to lope along next to it, then grab a handrail. My breath is deeper, my heart pounding heavy and strong, about to latch on to the power and speed of a train, about to be part of it, I love this feeling. Wild and free. I don't know if there's a better feeling than this. I can see why Pop chose this life before he met my mom and decided to settle down. I can understand why he has come back to it. Unlike a good many of those millions of folks who became homeless when all the banks failed, Pop had already experienced the hobo life and didn't have to struggle to adjust to it. I've seen men wearing rags that once wore tuxedos. I've also seen sections of hobo camps that are all made up of boys who ran away from the hard times on their farms or got separated from their parents somehow. A lot of those kids look sad and lost. Unless they have a grown-up looking after them, they might get taken advantage of. Have what few goods they've got taken, get beaten up. Some don't survive. But more and more keep coming. Pop showed me a story in a newspaper a few months back. It said that of the countless people now on the roads, there's thousands who are teenagers. I'm glad to be with Pop. Glad he chose to take me with him. And I'm glad I'm lanky and strong like Pop. Pop says he's never seen anyone learn the ins and outs of being on the road as fast as I have. There's men who have been hoboing for years, he says, who haven't picked up as much as I have in the 2 years since Mom's passing. I feel proud about being complimented that way, but I don't tell Pop what I think may be the real reason I've absorbed so much in such a short time. It's not just that I'm a natural fast learner, as my teacher said back at school. It's that losing Mom left such a hole in my heart that I needed to fill it up as soon as I could. Otherwise, my whole life might have run out like water from a leaky pail. But everything about being a knight of the road seemed to the perfect way to plug up that aching spot in my chest. That and having Pop always by my side, as constant as the sun coming up every dawn. The train is almost to us, not picking up much more speed because it's just hitting the uphill stretch that carries it over the hill. We're well concealed from sight by a mulberry bush, 30 feet from the track. Pop pats me on the shoulder. It means I am to go first, a few yards ahead of him. It makes me proud that I have his trust. I crouch like the sprinter I was during my last year in Garrison Elementary School, when my coach told me he never saw a boy with a faster start. A real Jim Thorpe, Coach McGunty had said. I might be running for that school now and not getting set to run after a train were it not for the fact that it's no more. I love to run and I know I'm good at it. I would wager that I'd have won a few races, but Garrison closed down for good around the same time we lost our little farm. Our crop had failed right after Mom died. That meant we couldn't make the payments on the mortgage, and the bank was not willing to carry us. All we could do was watch as the marshals came and took everything. House and barn, tools and furniture, livestock and all, leaving us just the clothes on our backs. Pop's decision for us to ride the rails together was easier to make then, both of us being so unencumbered. Me of school, Pop of what earthly goods he'd owned, and both of us no longer having Mom, the one loss that truly broke our hearts. We had both cared for her the best we could. You two are my good luck, she would say with that smile of hers. Pop spent everything he could on the doctor and the medicines, but she just kept getting sicker. And here's my bad luck again, she'd say about that, shaking her head and making it sound like a joke. Even when she was sick, Mom kept her sense of humor. She was beautiful, too. Taller than Pop, with wide shoulders that before her illness seemed strong enough to hold the weight of the world. Strong as my father is, he always said that if it came down to a wrestling match, she'd beat him. Sometimes when she hugged him, she'd pick him right up off the ground. She had long, dark hair that came to her waist and the biggest, darkest eyes I'd ever seen. Eyes that could see into my mind and know when I was happy or hurting, and then also know just what to say on either occasion. Those lovely, soulful Armenian eyes, Pop used to say, almost singing it. Their being Armenian was the only thing Mom knew about her family, who died right after coming to America. My bad luck, she'd say about that. Which was how she ended up in the New York Foundling Hospital, and then at the age of 10 on one of those trains that carried thousands of orphans like her west. There in Nebraska, the Wilsons, an older Polish couple with no children adopted her. And that was my first good luck, she'd say about them. They were so kind. I never met those adopted grandparents. The influenza of 1918 took them both when she was 18. My bad luck again. They left her a little money. It was not enough for her to stay in school to be a registered nurse, but she did get work as a practical nurse. That was how she met Pop. She was working in the Veterans Hospital when Pop, who'd been riding a train that crashed, was brought in. It was love at first sight, Pop would say. Mine first, Mom would add, seeing as how your father's eyes were bandaged up when I first saw him. But I fell for that cleft in his chin. You and me, we are getting married, sister, she told him the week the bandages came off, and we are getting us a place. And that is just what they did. How could I say no? Pop used to say whenever they told the story of how they got together. She was bigger than me. Then Mom would grab him by the arm or the shoulder and pretend she was going to beat him up before they ended up laughing together in a hug that always included me. Mom's money added on to what Pop had managed to save while working odd jobs as he was hoboing was enough to make the down payment on our farm. And a year later, I was born. She tried to keep taking care of us, but then halfway through doing something like making supper, it would happen. She'd stop, press her hand against her side where it was hurting, then she would have to lean against something. I wish my body could stay as strong as my love for you two, she'd whisper as Pop and I would come to steady her. My darn bad luck, she'd say then. I'm such a burden now. No burden I would not bear, Pop would reply. I would gladly carry you from here to France and back again. Then Mom would smile and let Pop and me help her to bed. What now, Pop? I asked as we walked away from what had been the only home I'd ever known. Pop was silent for a good half mile. Then he began to pick up the pace, me right behind. Pretty soon we were running full out. Even though Pop limped as he ran, he was still faster than most men. It felt good to be running like that. It wasn't like we were running away from anything or running with any destination in mind. We were just running for the sake of running the way Pop and I had done since I was old enough to run. It was something he said was in his blood, something his own father used to do with him, running. I loved it. We went a good 3 or 4 miles before we slowed down to walk. Neither of us was winded, but I could see that Pop had begun limping more. Plus, I sensed he was ready to talk now. He stopped, sat on a log by the roadside, and patted it for me to join him. There's one thing that comes to mind for us, Cal, he said, at least for now. Whatever you say, Pop, I replied, lifting my head. I am up to it. I believe you are, Pop said. But now the sound of the engine passing pulls me out of that memory. The engineer sees all of us from his elevated perch and nods. Like many of the men who drive those big machines, he holds no grudge against those of us looking for a ride. Keeping his train free of hobos is not his job. One after another, 3 passenger cars clickety-clack by. Now, Pop says. I bolt from behind the bush half a second before all the others around us. Out of the corner of my eye, I quickly count a dozen men rising up like those soldiers who grew from dragons' teeth in the old Greek story. I've always been quick at tallying up and taking note of such things, so it does not break my concentration as I focus on the rail I intend to grab. There's no competition for that handhold. Pop and I have got the jump on all the others. The other bows most likely will mass together at one or the other of the next boxcars with doors that'll be swung open by the first to arrive. Those who have hopped in first will reach out their hands for the rest, helping one another. That's part of being true knights of the road. My feet pounding on the loose stones along the track, I swing up my left arm, closest to the train, to grab the ladder side rail. A second later, my right hand takes a firm hold of the rail parallel to it. Then and only then do I lift my feet. Never try to jump up with a single handhold. That was one of the things I learned during our first week on the road. Not having a firm hold is a recipe for being swung under those unforgiving steel wheels that'll lop off a leg as easy as a knife cutting through butter. My feet find the rung and I reach up one hand after the other, climbing the ladder quick as a squirrel scrambling up an oak, making space behind me for Pop to follow. Despite that lame leg, he's managed a swift seesawing sort of run, fast as most men with two sound limbs. The vibration of the ladder below me tells me he's caught hold and heaved himself up. As soon as I get atop the car, I take a firm grip with my left and reach my right hand back. Not that Pop needs my help. Offering aid is just the proper thing to do. He takes my hand, shaking it as much as using it to assist him onto the roof. Then, with the grace of a dancer, he spins down into a sitting position next to me. We stay there for a while atop that car. The wind feels good in my face, although the strongest smell that comes to my nose is the coal smoke from the engine 5 cars ahead of us. I can also catch another scent in that wind. Magnolia, scent of the South, Pop says, reading my mind. Almost as sweet as the prairie. I nod, trying not to show any sadness in my face as I do so. Our little farm was far to the west of where we are today. Sometimes I miss that place so much it hurts. Though I would never say that to Pop. Out there in Kansas, the sky just goes on forever, and you can hear the meadowlarks singing in the spring. There's sage there and grasses you do not see in the east or south. Grasses the old buffalo herds grazed on before they were all killed off. There were Indians back then following those buffalo herds. Pop says there are still Indians there. I never saw any around our little farm or in the little nearby town. I suppose I have yet to meet one. The government keeps them cooped up on reservations to the north of where we live, according to Pop. Maybe, though, I might have seen an Indian or two and not recognized him. Pop says they don't look like the ones in the dime novels anymore. The government makes them dress like white folks and talk English. Indians nowadays, Pop says at times, I kind of catch in his voice for some reason, there are distinguished from sunburned farmers. There were Indians, he told me, with the expeditionary force. Reliable, Pop said once. Good men. That leads me to believe that while over there he was friends with an Indian or two. But he's never said more about them, and I've never asked. Unless he starts reminiscing of his own accord, asking Pop anything about the Great War is not a good idea. Asking almost always produces one of 3 results. First, which is least frequent, scarce as hen's teeth, is that he might actually answer. An answer usually short as a rabbit's tail, but a real answer nonetheless. Such as, it was shrapnel. End of answer to my question about what caused the wound that left a thick line of red scar tissue wrapped around his knee like a snake. Second result is nothing at all. No words, nothing. Just a silence so deep you could drown in it. An uncomfortable silence thick and heavy as a wool horse blanket that makes me wish I had kept my trap shut. Like the time I asked him about what it was like in the trenches. Third result is the one I dread. It makes me bite my lip. That is when a certain look comes over Pop's face. It's followed by a curse escaping from his lips like a hurt bird bursting from a cage. Then a black mood comes over him, and he clenches his fists and turns away. He has never struck me, but seeing him like that makes me feel as if I have been punched in the gut. The last time he got that way was when I asked him why he and the other men who served over there didn't get treated better after they came back home. That black mood can last a minute, an hour, or even a day. And woe betide any man who should cross Pop's path and do or say anything that might be taken amiss. Like that one huge railroad bull back in Omaha a month ago who came out from behind a little shed. A shed that bore the sign reading, "Jobless men keep going." He raised his club to hit me. Pop, who had been 2 paces behind me, was on him like a hawk on a fat rabbit. It all happened so fast that to this day I cannot describe what Pop actually did, but he left that big bully out cold and bleeding, his broken club on the ground next to him. I think my father might have killed him, if I hadn't grabbed his arm and yelled, "Pop, don't!" As soon as I did that, the look on his face changed. His shoulders drooped and his head dropped as he let me drag him away. He seemed dazed, as if he didn't know what to do. It was almost as if for a moment I was the father and he was the son. When I told him we'd better hop the next freight, he just nodded and let me lead him across the yard over to the track where they were putting together a line of empty boxcars. We climbed into the last empty reefer, humped off the main, me taking care of him. We ride the roof for a spell until the heat of the sun begins to get a bit much for us. Pop looks over at me, raises an eyebrow, and looks down. I nod. The two of us walk along the top of the boxcar till we are over an open door. Side by side, we both lean over to look inside. It's occupied, but there's plenty of room. Like circus acrobats, we each get a good hold and swing down to land light on our feet inside the car. "Whoa," says the beau closest to where we land. He's a man who appears middle-aged, with a neat little goatee and a clean white shirt. "Who might you gents be falling from the sky like you winged Mercury himself?" His voice is pleasant, and there's a bit of chuckle in it as he speaks. Before Pop can answer, a second man, bone-thin, with pants so short they leave his shins exposed and a cigarette dangling from his lips, speaks up. "It's Injun Joe," that man says, his voice raspy from smoking. Injun Joe. I look over at Pop, who's now staring straight at the thin smoker. "Boney," Pop says. That's all, but it's enough, especially when Pop uses that dangerous tone of voice. The thin man takes a step backward, plucks the cigarette from his mouth. He holds his arms out to the side, looking even more like a skeleton when he does that. "Sorry," he rasps. "Didn't mean nothing by it, Will. No offense?" Pop says nothing. He turns to the older man with the goatee, holds out his hand. "Professor," he says. "Nice to see you." "Railroad Will," the professor says. Couldn't make out your visage. Turned away as you were when you came catapulting in, but I should have discerned it from the dramatic manner of your entrance." Pop smiles, look towards me. "You haven't met my boy, Cal." I shake the professor's hand. His grasp is firm, but he's not trying to prove how tough he is by squeezing till it hurts. I make eye contact for a moment, noting how clear and blue those eyes of his are, how amused they look because of the way Pop put Boney in his place with a single word. I'm glad Pop did that. There is no way anyone should ever link my father with one of the worst characters in that novel by Mark Twain, Injun Joe, indeed. How could anyone ever picture my Pop as a murderous, drunken half-breed? Please, sir," I say, as I let go of his palm and step back. My, the professor says. "Quite the conversationalist, are we not?" Then he chuckles. "Take not my jesting in the wrong light, my lad. I am indeed pleased to meet you as well. Any son of your father's must be worthy of respect." Pop rests a hand on my shoulder. "The professor," he says to me, "was indeed that before the war, a professor of literature. But now," the professor adds, "I am but another foot soldier in the growing army of the unemployed, one who found his place in the university taken by younger men." The professor looks at me again. "There's the bright light of intelligence in this lad's eyes," he says. "Correct me if I am errant in my judgment, Will." "You could say that," Pop replies, a bit of pride in his voice. "And quite the reader. Never without a book in his bindle." "But not in school," the professor says. Pop shakes his head. I know that bothers him at times. "A boy as smart as you, Cal, there's no limit to what you might do with the right education. That's what my father said more than once in the time we've been nights of the road together." Then what Pop usually does is just shake his head and say, "Someday, somehow, but I guess you're okay for now." However, that is not how he answers the professor. Instead, he says something that surprises me. "Lately, Professor, I have been thinking about a way to remedy that." I look hard at my father. Remedy that? How? My school is closed and gone forever, and from what I know of schools, they're for those who live near them. People with homes. Not folks always on the fly. People with money go to school, not hobos. Makes no sense. But Pop says not another word, and as always, I do not attempt to break his silence. We settle into one corner of the boxcar that's shared, and in addition to Boney and the professor, by 3 other men. None of them know Pop, which is not all that surprising. There are so many of us riding these rails these days. Not just hundreds or thousands, but millions. I lean back against the boxcar wall, combing my hair. The thrumming of the rails makes the wall vibrate against my back. The sound of the steel wheels beneath me is familiar as the babbling of a brook is to one who lives by a stream. Pop's next to me, his shoulder warm against mine. His familiar scent is comforting to me as we lean against each other. It's a mix of wood smoke and soap. His body odor, even when he's all sweaty, somehow always smells clean. I close my eyes and start counting backward from 100, as I always do at night. I'm asleep before I can get to 90, comforted by the sound of my father breathing beside me. Next thing I know, I am back home. It is time for breakfast. I can smell Mom's cooking downstairs. It's bacon and eggs, toast made from bread she baked yesterday. My bed is so warm and comfortable that I don't feel like leaving it. But now, for some strange reason, it's vibrating under me. There's a sound of rumbling and rattling. I'd like to keep sleeping, but that grub sure smells good. A light tap on my toe wakes me. Pop is leaning over me. I'm no longer home, back at that house that's no longer ours, back when Mom was still with us. I'm on a train. I feel sad for a moment. The dream that took me over this time was gentle, a place I'd rather not leave. But it's gone now. Gone as that home where we were a family of 3. I push it away beyond the back of my mind. A man can't live in what's past. It's not real dark inside the car now. The moon shining in through the open door. As Pop pulls me up, I see another light coming from a corner. The flame of a portable stove. Little, but big enough to fry up whatever it is I'm smelling. Fried potatoes and bacon. The professor, the apparent owner of both stove and pan, is bent over, stirring the mix. "Care to share some of this repast?" he asks as we walk over to where he's cooking. I nod my head. I'm always hungry these days because I'm growing like a weed, Pop says. Pop holds out his banjo, the little frying pan he carries in his bag, along with the trenching shovel. The professor spoons out a pile of steaming hot bacon and fried potatoes. I'm pretty sure the potatoes in the pan were my father's contribution, given him by Ms. Euler. Pop and I pull out the metal spoons we always carry and dig in. Before I know it, we're scraping the bottom of the pan. Only the 3 of us share that little meal. The other 4 in the car stayed in their corner. Add to a meal, you get to share it. When you don't, you don't. Unless you're truly in dire straits. Rule number 15. Help your fellow hobos whenever and wherever needed. You may need their help one day. The professor and I wash our food down with water from Pop's army canteen. Boney and the other bows are passing a small bottle around, but Boney knows enough not to offer it to my Pop. My father does not object to the drinking of others, unless they get so liquored up as to be bothersome. But no alcohol ever passes his lips. I make a pillow out of my coat and lay back next to Pop on the wooden floor of the car. There was a time when we first took to the road months ago when sleeping on a hard surface was not easy for me. I'd been pampered too long by having my own bed. But my body got used to the change. Plus, being outdoors in the fresh air makes sleep come faster to a man. Now all I need to do is close my eyes and listen to Pop's breathing. With him by my side, it's easy to drift off to slumberland. I wonder, just before I fall back asleep, if that dream of home is going to come back. I start counting. 100, 99, 98. When I open my eyes, it feels like no time's passed at all. But it has. It has to have been hours. Dappled morning sunlight is streaming in through the open door. That tells me we are heading southwest. Pop, sitting next to me, has that newspaper open and is reading it. As always, I've just opened my eyes a crack. Nothing's moved but my eyelids, so I do not think he knows I am awake. As I watch, he reads and then rereads the page he's holding up in front of him. He's looking at it so intently that it seems as if his eyes might burn a hole into it. Washington, Pop says in a whisper. He lowers the paper. You're awake, he says. I sit up and nod. Good, he says. Remember Joe Angelo, son? I told you about him last year. I nod again. I have a good memory, as Pop knows. Joe Angelo was a vet. Like Pop, he survived the Great War. Mentioning him might mean Pop's about to share more memories about being over there. This will be the second time this week that my father has decided to talk about the war. He doesn't do that often, but lately it seems to be on his mind a lot. Met Joe in 1918 after the big battle on the Meuse-Argonne line. He was in the 327th Tank Division. When their commander, Major George Patton, was wounded, it was Joe who dragged him to safety, patched him up, and then ran Patton's orders from one group of tanks to another. Pop puts aside the newspaper he was reading. Then he reaches into his pocket to pull out the folded article he carries there next to his compensation certificate. I've seen it before, but Pop wants me to look at it again. I unfold it carefully and read the headline. Veteran, wearing medals, jobless, stirs committee. Below it is the picture of a skinny man wearing his army uniform, serviceman's cap on his head, 8 medals pinned to his chest. His face is thin, starved looking. His eyes are huge, dark, and haunted. He'd just testified, Pop says, in Washington, D.C. to the House Committee on Ways and Means, which was considering whether us veterans could take out loans against our compensation certificates. Joe walked all the way from his home in Camden, New Jersey. Took him 3 days on Shank's mare. Pop takes the article back from me, reads what Joe Angelo said. I come to show you people that we need our bonus. I represent 1,800 men from New Jersey. They are just like myself, men out of work. I've got a little home back there that I built with my own 2 hands after I came home from France. Now I expect to lose that little place. Why? My taxes are not paid. I have not worked for 2 years and a half. Last week I went to our town committee, and they gave me $400 for rations. $4 for rations. Pop looks at me, biting his lip. Sound familiar, son? I nod. Pop shakes his head. Makes me feel as if I ought to do something. If one Joe Angelo could stir those congressmen, what about 10,000 of us? All of us in Washington, asking nothing more than to be treated fair and square for the sacrifices we made. Joe told them he was making good money, $1.25 an hour at the DuPont Powder Works, but he chose to enlist, not drafted like some, for Army pay of $1 a day. Pop folds the article with the care of someone folding a flag. He slips it into his pocket and lifts up the newspaper. His lips are pressed together as he looks at it. We rattle on for another 10 miles or so. Then he turned it toward me so I could see the headline. Vets marching on Washington, D.C. Washington, he says, tapping the newspaper with one finger. Men like Joe and me are going there now. Vets asking for a fair shake. They figure that if enough of us show up, Congress and the President will have to do something. They'll have to give us our bonuses. And me too. Pop's voice has been getting more excited as he's been talking. He looks straight at me and says that name. Washington. Says it like a magician, chanting abracadabra before he pulls a rabbit out of his hat. Washington. Me and Washington? Can you imagine that, Cal? I don't say anything, but I can. I have one of those rare moments where I can sort of see the future. There are all of those soldiers marching down Pennsylvania Avenue. Pop is marching with them. But I don't see me there. Yes, sir, Pop says, bringing me back to present. Yes, sir. His voice is softer. He's talking to himself now. That's it. I need to join my brother soldiers. One last campaign, one last march. His mind's made up. Once Pop decides on something, nothing stops him. Not hell or high water. And now I'm feeling excited, too. If Pop is going to Washington, I'll surely be going there as well. Me taking care of him taking care of me. Washington, D.C. I've never seen that place, but I've read about it, and it sounds wonderful. The Capitol building, the big memorials, the White House, all sorts of museums, and the nation's biggest library. But then Pop lowers the paper and looks straight at me. The expression on his face has changed. It's no longer excited. It's thoughtful. Son, he says, I have been thinking. The tone of his voice has changed too. It's serious in a way that worries me. Now that I am going to Washington, now I'm confused, especially because of the way he emphasized that one word. I, not we. I say. Pop, won't we both be going? He shakes his head. No, son. If this is going to be a campaign, then I have to go without you. It might be dangerous, and I want you safe while I'm gone. It'll be me and the other vets doing this. It's time for you. He pauses, looking out the door at the trees and the telegraph poles whizzing by, the trains going over a rough spot in the tracks, the two of us rocking back and forth with the motion of that boxcar. What, Pop? I ask. Time for what? School, he says. I have been thinking about this ever since we hit the road. It's not right you missing out on schooling. You need to get back to being educated, Cal. And I know how to do it. That confuses the dickens out of me. Back to being educated, back to school. I cannot imagine any way on God's green earth that can be done. The school I was going to is closed. No other school is going to take in a hobo boy that just hopped off a freight train, nor do we have money for such things as books and school supplies. And where would I live while going to school? It makes no sense. How? I say. Then just because I'm feeling totally befuddled, I say it again. How? But for some reason that makes Pop chuckle. Exactly, he says. He lifts his head to look straight at me. Then he does something strange. He holds out his left hand and strokes the back of it with the fingers of his right. He's done sign language before, especially when it's been necessary for us to keep quiet, like when we're hiding from a railroad bull. Sign language comes in handy at such times. But what he just did was a sign I haven't seen before. I don't understand it. It's not like lifting his index finger up and dropping it down for yes, or holding out an empty palm for no. I don't know that sign, Pop. He smiles, strokes the back of his hand again. It means Indian, he says, pointing out how Indian skin is darker than that of a white man. Indian? Then he holds out his hands, side by side, open palm up. That's a gesture I understand. It means book. But I still cannot grasp what he's telling me. Finally, as if it explains everything rather than making me even more baffled, he says two words. Indian school.